We continue now at the top of Daf Kuf Gimel Amud Aleph in Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf 103a. The Mishnah says, Kol shelo zocha hamizbeach bevesara, any carbon where the mizbeach does not get the meat of the carbon, lo zocha kohanim ba'ora, so then the kohanim, they don't get the hide of the carbon. Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, olas ish, it says the ola of a man, and it means ola sha'olso leish, it means the ola that fulfill the obligation of the person. Rashi explains, Kol shelo zocha hamizbeach bevesara, if the mizbeach did not merit to get the meat of the carbon, could go in she'ira b'psol kodem zrika. What the Mishnah means is, for example, let's say there was some disqualification before the zrika, before the throwing of the blood of the carbon ola, to lo haisa lo shas heter lemizbeach. There was no moment where it was mutter for the mizbeach, so it's not that the meat has to actually go on the mizbeach, it just means it has to be fit for the mizbeach. If it was never fit for the mizbeach, then the kohanim don't get the hide. And the Mishnah continues, Ola shenishchita shelo lishma, if an Ola was slaughtered not for its sake, afal pi shelo also lebailim, even though that did not satisfy the obligation of the owner in such a situation, Ora lekohanim, but still there the hide does belong to the kohanim. And Rashi explains, Ora lekohanim mikroi isra boy bebraisa begemara, that's going to be included from Sukkim in the Braisa in the Gemara. And the Mishnah continues, Echad olas ho'ish ve'echad olas ha'isha, this halacha is true whether it's an Ola brought by a man or an Ola brought by a woman, Oroseyan la kohanim, again the hides go to the kohanim. And Rashi explains, V'echad olas ha'isha dis raboi nami mikra, when it comes to olas ha'isha also, that's included from a pasuk. And the Mishnah continues, Oros kachim kalim, when it comes to the hides of kachim kalim, the karbonos of lesser kedusha, labailim, those hides go to the owners. And Oros kachei kachim, when it comes to the hides of kachei kachim, meaning even aside from carbon ola, la kohanim, that goes to the kohanim. And the way we know that is kal v'chomer, we make the following kal v'chomer. Uma im ola shelo zachu bevesar, if by a carbon ola where the kohanim don't get the meat, zachu ba'ora, they get the hide, so kachei kachim, when it comes to karbonos of kachei kachim, shezachu bevesara, there the meat goes to kohanim, eino din sheyizku ba'ora, isn't it logical that they should get the hide? And the Mishnah continues, ein mizbeach yochiach, there's no counter argument against this kal v'chomer from the mizbeach, because the mizbeach does not get the hide, but it does get the meat of the carbon, but that's not a counter argument, she'ein lo or b'chol makom, because the mizbeach never gets the hide. And Rashi explains, Oros kachei kachim, when it comes to the hides of kachei kachim, that refers to chatos v'ashamos, carbon chatos, carbon ashamos, la kohanim, there the hides go to the kohanim, kid mefarish time of v'azal, as the Mishnah will explain. And ein ha-mizbeach mochiach, the mizbeach doesn't provide a counter argument. Kolomar, what it means to say is, ve'ein lach lomar mizbeach yochiach, you shouldn't say that mizbeach would argue the other way. Shezacha b'vsar ha'ola, because the mizbeach gets the meat of a carbon ola, v'lo zacha ba'ora, but it doesn't get the hide. So then don't be surprised by kachei kachim. And even though the kohanim get the meat, lo yizku ba'or, and they shouldn't get the hide. Ein zu hochacha, that is not a valid argument. She'ein lemizbeach or b'chol makom, because the mizbeach never gets hide. Avol the kohanim, but when it comes to the kohanim, matzinu shezachu ba'or ha'ola, we find that they do merit the hide of the carbon ola. The kal v'chomer sheyizku ba'or is kachei kachim. Therefore, it's a kal v'chomer that they should get the hides of kachei kachim. And the Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis taught, Olas Ish, again the pasuk says Olas Ish, Prat lo Olas Hektish, Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, this halach is by Olas Ish, but it excludes Olas Hektish. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, Omer Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda says, Prat lo Olas Geirim, it excludes the Ola that is brought by converts. Rashi explains, Prat lo Olas Hektish, l'kamei mefarish lo. The Gemara, as it goes on, will explain what that means, excluding Olas Hektish. And Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda said, Prat lo Olas Geirim, l'kamei parach. Later we're going to ask on this. Atu ger lav ishu, is a ger not an ish? What does it mean that olas ish, that it excludes olas gerim? And the Gemara now continues, my prat olas hektish. What does it mean when it says in the Braisa that we're excluding olas hektish? And the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Chia bar Yosef, Rabbi Chia bar Yosef says, prat ola haboa min hamosaris. It means to exclude an ola that comes from the remainders. Rashi explains, min hamosaris, from what was extra. It means as follows. T'chol hashamos shel re'iyah, let's say you have an asham that's left to graze. Kagon temuras asham, for example, let's say you had a substitute of an asham, v'asham shemesu bailov, or you had an asham where the owners died, v'shekipru bailov ba'achar, or let's say the owners got an atonement with some other animal. The kaimullah, and so the halach is in all of these cases, yiru v'yimachru, what we say is that the animal should be left to graze till it develops a blemish and then it's sold. V'yiplu t'mei, and then Nedava, and then the money goes to Nedava, to donations, which is V'hu Olas Kayetz HaMizbeach. Those are Olas that are brought in the summer on the Mizbeach, on the long days. They never wanted the Mizbeach to be bottled. They always wanted a carbon on the Mizbeach, and so they would put these Olas on the Mizbeach. Now, Delav Olas issue, now that kind of Ola, essentially this Olas Kayetz HaMizbeach, which comes from Mosaros, which is these extra funds that come again from these animals that are left to graze, that's not called Olas Ish. Ella nidvas tziburi. That's in the category of a donation of the community. V'unesachem mishel tzibur. And the libations, they don't come from any particular individual, not from that individual who originally had that animal for the asham. Rather, the libations come from the community. Ve'in ba'olav somecholeh. Also, this owner does not do smicha. He doesn't lean upon it. Ve'in oshochti. Doesn't slaughter it. K'itzanan b'tzmura. Like we learn in the Mishnah in Tamura. And we will note that the Shinui Nuschos has an alternate girsa, ve'ino ovda, instead of ve'ino shochta, it's ve'ino ovda. Let's say he's a Kohen. He can't say that he's going to do the avoda for this ola because it's his carbon. It is not his carbon, it is communal. And again, the point of the Bryce is these kinds of karbanos, there the hide does not go to the Kohanim. And the Gemara continues and says, mosaros lenidvas tzibor azli. This works according to the one who says that the mosaros are used for nidvas tzibor, as we just said. So again, we're going to say that it's nidvas tzibor, and therefore the hides are not going to go to the Kohanim. Mosaros lenidvas yochid azli. But according to the one who says that the mosaros are considered an individual donation, so what are we going to say according to that? And Rashi explains, Hanicha pluksa de Rebbe Eliezer v'Rabbanan hi betzmura. This is a machlokas Rebbe Eliezer and the Rabbanan in Tzmura. Lenidvas tzibor leketz hamizbeach. Again, nidvas tzibor means it goes for the summertime mizbeach. But there's another opinion. It's lenidvas yochid, that it's for the individual nidava. Meaning, ba'olav shel asham shenitosar, the owner of the asham which was extra, who atzmo mevi ola b'damav, he himself is bringing the ola with that money after the animal is sold. V'hu somech olah, he does lean upon the animal. V'shoch, then he slaughters it. Unasacha kraven mishalo, and the libations are brought from his own funds. And so therefore it essentially is a private carbon. So what are we going to say according to that Mando Amar? And the Gemara continues and answers, Kedo Amar Rava, it's like Rava said, Ha'ola, it says in the Pasuk, Ha'ola, Ola Rishona, that means it's the first Ola, that's referring to the carbon tamid that is brought in the morning, it's the first carbon of the day. And Hachanami, here also we can say the same thing, Ha'ola, Ola Rishona. And Rashi explains the answer, Kedo Amar Rava, it's like Rava says, Gabe V'orach Aleh Ha'ola, by the Pasuk which says, V'orach Aleh Ha'ola, the Alfinon Mino, we learn from there, Minayin Shloye Dover Kodem Lataman Shal Shachar, we learn from that Pasuk, how do we know nothing should precede the morning Tamid? Talmud Lomer v'arach aleh ha'ola. We learned that again from the pasuk where it says ha'ola. V'amrinon my Talmud, and we say what exactly is the derivation? How does this pasuk show that? V'yamar Rav, and Rav said on that ha'ola mashma ha'ola rishona ha'amura b'seder karbanos hayom. When it says ha'ola, the ola, that is understood to mean the ola that is first, the first one that is mentioned in the order of the karbanos of the day. Now, once we have that derivation hachanami, we can say that here as well. Or ha'ola, when it says in the pasuk or ha'ola, talking about the hide of the ola, ksiv ha'ola rishona shehufrasha mitchila l'shem ola. Here we're going to interpret the hay of ha'ola, the ola, as that it was originally separated to be an ola. V'lo haba mimosar asham, and not that it's coming from leftover asham, or mimosar chatas, or from leftover chatas, like these cases over here, even if it is really a private carbon. Ulakame parach, and the Gemara later will ask, v'hakay malon ora la kohanim, but isn't the halacha that the hide does go to the Kohanim? Medrash Yehoyada HaKohen, we see that from the Medrash of Yehoyada HaKohen, that the Gemara will ask later on. And the Gemara continues with another explanation of Rabbi Yehuda. What does it mean, prat le'olas hektish? Rabbi Ivo Amar Rabbi Yanai. Rabbi Ivo says that Rabbi Yanai says, prat le'matvis ola lebedek habayis. It excludes a situation where a person takes an animal that's a carbon ola, it's supposed to be going on the mizbech, and instead he says he wants it to be for bedek habayis, that the value of the animal is being donated for the repair of the Beis HaMikdash. And the Gemara continues and explains, Lo mi boy lemando amar kodshe bedek habayis tafsi midoraisa. We don't even need to say that this works according to the one who says that Kodshe Bedek Habayis does take effect on a Doraisa level. But even according to the one who says that the Bedek Habayis doesn't take effect on this animal, and this Ola is still going to be brought on the Mizbeach as an Ola, but Hani Mili Basar, but that's only with regards to the meat of the animal. Aval or Tafis, but in terms of the hide, it is considered to be Bedek Habayis, and therefore it is now diverted away from the Kohanim, and it's used towards the repair of the Beis HaMikdash, and that's what it means. Prat La'olas Hektish, in this case of Matvis Ola Bedek Habayis, the hide is not going to go to the Kohanim. And the Gemara continues, V'chein amar Rav Nachman amar Rabba bar Avua, and likewise Rav Nachman says that Rabba bar Avua says, Prat la'ola haba min hamosaros. Again, according, like the first explanation of the Gemara, the interpretation of Rabbi Yehuda is, we're excluding an ola that comes from leftover funds. And the Gemara continues, Amar le Rav Hamnuna Rav Nachman. Rav Hamnuna said to Rav Nachman, Kaman, who is that following Rabbi Yehuda? It seems that you're following Rabbi Yehuda. Again, Rabbi Yehuda said it comes to exclude the olas hektish. But the problem is hahaderbe. But the problem is that Rabbi Yehuda actually retracted that. The Tanya, as we learned in a brisa, Shisha linedava. There are 6 for nedava. Laola haba min hamosaros, an ola that comes from the leftover funds, which means to say shalo yehu kohanim zakoin ba'ora, that the kohanim do not get the hide. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, these are the words of Rabbi Yehuda, and again, that's essentially what Rabbi Yehuda said above, that in a situation of ola haba min hamosaros, again, olas hektish, they do not get the hide. But then Amar lo Reb Nechemia, but then Reb Nechemia said to him, he said to Rabbi Yehuda, Ve'amri lo Rabbi Shimon, some say it's Rabbi Shimon that said to Rabbi Yehuda, Imkein, if so, bitalta midrasho shel Yehoyada HaKohen. If so, you're nullifying the medrash of Yehoyada HaKohen. The Tanya, as we learned in a brisa, Zeh medrash doresh Yehoyada HaKohen. The following medrash was darshaned by Yehoyada HaKohen. Asham hu, Asham laHashem, and we learn from that pasuk, Kol sheba mishum chatas or mishum asham, anything that comes because of a chatas or an asham, yilakach bo olos, you use those funds to purchase olos, and habasar laHashem, the basar, the meat goes laHashem, and ora laKohanim, but the hide does go to the Kohanim. So how can you say that the hide does not go to the Kohanim? And the Gemara continues, Amar lei, so he said back to him, Elamar b'mai mukim la, but the master, how are you going to understand this exclusion? And the Gemara says, Amar lei, says to him, Mukmina lei b'maktish nechasav. Again, we're going to say that it's talking about somebody who sanctified all of his property for bedek habayis. Uchid Rabbi Yoshua, and it would follow Rabbi Yoshua. The Tanan, as we learned in a Mishnah, hamaktish nechasav, if somebody sanctifies his property for bedek habayis, v'hayu behen behemos, haruuyos lagavi mizbeach, zechor munekevos, and among his property he has animals that are fit for the mizbeach, males and females. Rabbi Eliezer says, zecharim yimachru letzorchei olos, the male animals are sold for the purpose of karbonola. Nikevos yimachru letzorchei zivchei shlamim, the female animals are sold for the purpose of shlamim. Udemeyan yipluim shar nechasim lebedek habayis, and their value is going to go with the rest of the property. It's going to go towards bedek habayis. In other words, the animals are sold off and used as karbonos, and the money that is gotten, that is received from those animals, that's going to be used for bedek habayis, according to Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yoshua says you don't sell the animals. Zecharim atzmam yikravu olos. The male animals themselves are actually brought. They're offered as olos. Unikevos yimachru letzarchei shlamim. And when it comes to the females, they're sold as shlamim. V'yavi b'demeyan olos. And then with the value, with the money, you bring more karbonolas. Ushar nechasim yiplu lebedek habayis. And the rest of the property, it all goes for the repair of the Beis HaMikdash. And the Gemara continues and explains, Va'afilu l'Rabbi Yoshua, even according to Rabbi Yoshua, the Yamar Adam Cholek Hekdeshu, who says again that the person divides his hekdesh, that the actual animals are not going to be bedek habayis, they're going to be brought as karbonos, and again the bedek habayis, the rest of his property will be for bedek habayis. But hani mili basar, but again that's only true by the meat of the animals in terms of the karbonos, avol or tafis, but when it comes to the hide, so the bedek habayis actually does take effect, and therefore again the hide will not go to the Kohanim. And Rashi explains, again, Rabbi Yanai's explanation of Rabbi Yehuda's prat lematfis olasu lebedek habayis, it's to exclude one who is matfis as ola to bedek habayis, shein ora lekohanim, that the hide does not go to the Kohanim. And Rashi continues, v'lo mi boy beperak basar de tmura, this is in the last parak of Tmura, to kamar ula hamatfis ola lebedek habayis. Over there, Ula says that if somebody has a carbon ola and instead he says it should go to bedek habayis towards the repair of the Beis HaMikdash, ein ba elo ikuv gizborim bilvad, all that you have is the hold up from the gizbor, meaning this animal can still be offered as a carbon. Umusvinan le'ula, and we ask on Ula that hamatvis ola, it says that if one is matvis ola lebedek habayis, aser l'shochta ad shetipade, one cannot slaughter it until it's redeemed, that you actually need redemption. It's not just the hold up from needing the gizbor. Umeshani, and the Gemara umeshani Ula, and Ula answers, hay dematzrich le'pedia, the requirement to redeem the animal, that's just midrabanan, that's only midrabanan, that's not needed on a doraisa level. Mechlal, now that implies that man demosiv, that the one who was asking the question in the first place, boy lememar doraisa, understood that redemption is needed on a doraisa level. And so you have over here a machlokus whether redemption of this animal is needed on a doraisa level or a derabanan level. And the point is, ula inyan ora, but when it comes to the hide, that's all with regards to the meat of the animal. But with regards to the hide, lo mi boilaman do amra mi doraisa tafsaba kedushas bedek habayis. We don't even need to say, according to the one who says that on a doraisa level, now this animal has kedushas bedek habayis, dein ora lekohanim, that the hide will not go to the kohanim. Im shachta ad shelo niftis, if it's slaughtered before being redeemed. The lav olas ishu el olas hektish, because it's not considered the ola of an individual, it's considered olas hektish. El afilu leman do amra midrabanan bialma, but even according to the one who says that it's just midrabanan, avol midoraisa lo, but that wouldn't be true on a doraisa level. On a doraisa level, it wouldn't have that kedushas bedek habayis. But hani mili to midoraisa lo, when we say that on a doraisa level, it doesn't have kedushas bedek habayis. That's basar. That's the meat. The shel mizbeach, with the meat belongs to the mizbeach. Vein kedusha chol olav, and that kedushas bedek habayis is not chal. She'eno shalo al piv, it's not his through that. Aval or, but when it comes to the hide, to lav mammon mizbeach, that is not the property of the mizbeach. The kohanim akati lo zachu bei, and the kohanim don't yet have a stake in the hide. So tough is then it does take effect. It has that kedushas bedek habayis. And Rashi continues again. The Gemara then brought Rav Nachman, who said that we exclude the Ola Haba min Hamosaros, that there the hide does not go to the Kohanim. And the Gemara said, Keman, who is Rav Nachman following Reb Yehuda? He seems to be following Reb Yehuda. Lakaman Maisilo, the Gemara is about to bring that. Damar Ein Ora La Kohanim, that Reb Yehuda is going to say in this case that the hide does not go to the Kohanim, but Hahadar Bey. But we see that actually Reb Yehuda retracted from that. To Kohanim relay, because they say to him, Im Kain Bitalta Midrasho Shal Yehoyada HaKohen. If you say that, you nullify the medrash of Yehoyada HaKohen, v'lo ahader lehu midi, and he doesn't respond. It seems like he agrees and retracts. And then the Gemara brought Shisha l'nedava. There are 6 for nedava. What is that referring to? This is from a Mishnah in Shkolim. It's referring to the Biyud Gimel shofaros shahayu b'mikdash kamayri. It's talking about the 13 shofaros, the 13 horns in the mikdash, and they had funds that were essentially in these shofaros that they used for the karbanos. T'chasav alein tiklin chadatin v'tiklin atikin. It was written on them, some were for the new shekel, someone for the old shekel. Kinin v'goz aleola, eitzim u'levona v'zav l'chapores v'shisha l'nedava. So you had again designated for various items in the Beis HaMikdash, and 6 were for donations. U'mefaresh ma'ini u'shisha l'nedava, and it's explaining in Shkolim what are the 6 for donations. Hachi garsin, and the proper text is shisha l'nedava la'ola haba min hamosaros. So one in the list is the ola that comes from this leftover funds. She'ein hakohanim zakoin b'ora, that the kohanim, they don't get the hide. Asham la'Hashem, efshar Asham la'Hashem, shekvar nemar Asham la'Kohen, kachatos, it says it's la'Hashem, and it says it's la'Kohen, ka'asham Torah achas lohem v'gomer, ha'ketzar, how so? Does it belong to Hashem? Does it belong to the Kohanim? And the answer is as follows, kol davar habami moser chatos, anything that comes from the leftover funds from a chatos, kagon ma'afresh mos l'chatos. So for example, a person designated for some money for his chatos, v'nitoser mehen, you had extra money, umimoser ashamos, you had extra asham, kagon hanach da'azli l'ri'ah, like the ones that you have to leave them to graze, the kaimalon, like we've established, kol shebechatos mesa, ba'asham roa, all the case of chatos where it dies, by an asham we leave it to graze. So yilakach ben, you purchase with them, nimsu shnei ksuvim mekuyamin, and now we fulfilled both psukim. Asham la'Hashem means basar la'ola, the meat is for an ola, that's la'Hashem. V'asham la'Kohen, and it's for the Kohen ha'or, that means the hide. V'hainu d'chsiv, and that's what's written in the pasuk, kesef asham v'kesef chatos lo yuva. And so again, the point over here is he retracted based on this, and we said that the hide does go to the Kohanim. And so the Gemara then says, Elamar, so the master, b'may mukila, lahadetani la'el, prat la'olas hektish. How do you understand the exclusion of olas hektish if it's not talking about the minha mosaros? And so the Gemara then said, Rabbi Yoshua, we're following Rabbi Yoshua. Again, we're essentially talking about matfis lebedek habayis, following Rabbi Yoshua, da'amar zecharim atzman yikravu olo, somebody who says all of his property is for bedek habayis. If he has animals that are fit for karbanos, they're male animals, they're actually offered as olos. V'hach olas hektish, and that's an olas hektish. That's what we refer to as olas hektish. Uchidim esayim v'azal, as the Gemara will conclude. T'chiyam Rabbi Yoshua, d'chayel shem mizbeach alayim meikara, amai d'chazil mizbeach. When Rabbi Yoshua says that which is fit for the mizbeach goes to the mizbeach, ka'amar, that's what he's talking only on that which is fit for the mizbeach, meaning the meat. Avol ba'or, but by the hide, moda d'chayel Allah kedushas bedek habayis. He would admit that on that is the kedushas bedek habayis that applies. And Rashi continues, again the Gemara said, HaMakdish nechasav lebedek habayis, somebody who's makdish his property for bedek habayis towards the repair of the Beis HaMikdash. So haru'uyos lemizbeach tamimim, any animals that have no blemishes that are fit for the mizbeach. Zecharim yimachru letzarchei olos, the first opinion was the male should be sold for olos. The kaimelan betmura hamatfis tamimim lebedek habayis, kashay niftin, einon niftin el lemizbeach. Like we said, if you have these unblemished animals for bedek habayis, when they're redeemed for the mizbeach. Shakala roy lemizbeach einu yot. If it's fit for the Mizbeach, it can't leave the Mizbeach. So if you're going to redeem it, it has to go towards the Mizbeach. But then we had the other opinion, Zecharim Atzmon Yikravu Olos, that the male animals themselves should be offered as Olos. L'shem Oso Ish, for that person. To Kasavar Adam Cholek Hekdesho, because a person divides up his Hekdesh. V'afagav Demakdish Stama Dai to Havel Hakriv L'Mizbeach Haroilo, even though he just said in general, without specifying that he's being Makdish everything for Bedek HaBayis, we understand his intention that whatever is fit for the Mizbeach goes on the Mizbeach. Now the female animals, they actually should be sold for olos. You don't bring the female animals as shlamim themselves. It has to be sold and the money used for carbon ola. Since again he was makdish without specifying, he's saying anything fitted for the Mizbeach should be like bedek habayis in the sense that it's entirely kadosh. Therefore it's assumed that he's doing it for the value of an ola, not as a shlamim. Uvahach ola de Rabbi Yoshua. Now, in this ola of Rabbi Yoshua, zecharim hakrivim olos. Again, the Rabbi Yoshua says the male animals themselves are brought as olos. Ka'amar Rabbi Yehuda le'el. That's what Rabbi Yehuda was saying earlier. Prat la'olas hektish, that we're excluding olas hektish, that the hides don't go to the kohanim. V'yafilu Rabbi Yoshua, and even according to Rabbi Yoshua, kolomar, meaning to say, v'yaf agav dam Rabbi Yoshua adam cholek hektish or roy lemizbeach. Even though we said according to Rabbi Yoshua that a person divides up his hektish and what's fit for the mizbeach goes to the mizbeach, v'she'enu roy lemizbeach yehel bedek habayis, and what's not fit for the mizbeach is for bedek habayis. Lo shiu kashar kachim mizbeach, but it's not treated like other kachim mizbeach. She'orosein lekohanim, where the hides go to the kohanim. Demodahu, he admits sha'or nitfas lebedek habayis kashar nechasim shelo, that the hides they go to bedek habayis like other parts of his property. And the Gemara continues, we said above, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda says, Prat olas geirim, when it says olas ish, it excludes olas geirim, the olas of converts, there the hide does not go to the Kohanim. And the Gemara continues, Amar le Rav Simoy bar Chilkoi l'Ravina, Rav Simoy bar Chilkoi said to Ravina, Atu ger lav ishu, is a convert, not a man, why is that excluded? Amar le said to him, Prat le ger shemes, it's excluding a convert who dies, ve'ein lo yarshim, and he has no heirs. And Rashi explains, the ein lo yarshim, if the ger dies and he has no heirs, the ein la bailim, the point is, there's no owner now for this carbon ola, that's what we're excluding. In that case, the hide does not go to the kohanim. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis taught, olas ish, it says again in the pasuk, olas ish, ein li ela olas ish, I only know an ola that belongs to a man. Olas gerim noshim v'avodim minayin, how do we know olas gerim noshim, women and avodim and slaves, from where do we know that? Talmud lomar or ha'ola, it says or ha'ola, riba, that's an inclusion. Imkain, if so, ma Talmud lomar olas ish, why does the pasuk say olas ish, which seems to be excluding something? That's ola sha'olsa ish, that refers to an ola that is satisfying the obligation of the person. Prat l'nishchata chutz l'zmana v'chutz l'makom, that excludes if it was slaughtered with intention outside of the proper time, outside of the proper place. Shalo yehu hakohanim zakoin bora, that in that situation the kohanim will not merit to get the hide. Now one might think that I also include, let's say it was slaughtered not for its sake, also l'bailim, because in that case also it doesn't satisfy the obligation of the owner. And we will note over here that the Shinuyu Nuscho says Rashi zal logoris tevas gerim. Rashi takes out the word gerim over here when we say olas ish, and we say ainli ella olas ish, but olas geirim noshim ve'avodim minayin. He takes out olas geirim. We're talking specifically about olas noshim ve'avodim. That's Rashi's girsa. V'chein machka b'shita mekubetzes. Also the shita mekubetzes erases the word geirim. However, u'midivrei haRambam near degoras goyim. From the words of the Rambam, it seems that he had the text of goyim over here. Again, so we're talking about olas goyim noshim ve'avodim minayin according to the Rambam. And Rashi explains, Hachi Garsinan olas ish, ein liela olas ish, olas noshim va'avodim minayin. How do we know that it applies to the ola of women and slaves? that again, that we say that the hide belongs to the Kohanim. So it says, ha'ola kro yaseru, that's an extra pasuk, the lo itzrich lemichtav. It only needed to write ela ha'or la kohen. It only needs to say ha'or la kohen, so you have an extra word over there. Ela l'rabos ba, rather again, it's coming as an inclusion. And we will also note that the Shinui Nuscho says, where it says Yochol Shani Marbe, one might think that I include Shenishchata Shelo Lishma. So the Shinui Nuscho brings a gears of Memayit. One might think that I might exclude. In other words, we've excluded Nishchata Chutz Lizmana, we've excluded Chutz L'Makoma. Those cases, we say Prat. We exclude those cases, and we say again that the hide does not go to the Kohanim. I might think to exclude Shenishchata Shelo Lishma, Hoel Velo also L'Bailim, since it doesn't satisfy the obligation of the owner. Rashi explains, Hoel Velo also L'Bailim, since it doesn't satisfy the obligation of the owner, V'afal Pishi Kashera, even though it is still a kosher carbon. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Kuf Gimel Amid Beis.